to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. We have a wonderful treat today because Derek and I have been wondering for, actually I think probably since the podcast first started, who we can talk to about the Battle of Brunanburh. And then we remembered that a friend of ours has actually written a few books based around the Brunanburh story. So today we're going to talk to M.J. Porter, who is the author of many historical novels set predominantly in the 7th to 11th century England and Viking Age Denmark. Raised in the shadow of a building that is believed to house the bones of long-dead kings of Mercia, MJ's writing destiny was set. I love that idea. I grew up near Conisbrough Castle, and that's where my writing destiny was set, so I totally get that. MJ's Brunanburh series, King of Kings, Kings of War, and Clash of Kings. Is it concluding with Clash of Kings, MJ, or is there another one on the way after that?
There will be another one. There will be 4 of them.
There will be another one. Yay! Because I've just finished Clash of Kings, so I thought, I don't want it to end like that. So far we've got 3, waiting for a 4th, and it is absolutely fabulous series. I've spent the whole of December reading it and really enjoyed it. So welcome, MJ Porter.
Thank you. Hi, Derek. Hi, Sharon.
Good to talk to you.
We're very happy to have you. Like I said, we've been looking around for a while for somebody to talk about Brunanburh, so you'd better have your Brunanburh hat on.
I better, yes. I mean, you've spoken to Bernard Cornwall, haven't you? But I think you spoke to him about his
100 Years War series, yeah.
Yes. Oh, you missed a trick there.
I think because we've just been speaking to Matthew Harvey.
Okay.
So we try and mix up the eras so that we don't, have 2 episodes running in the same era, one after the other. So we like our variety. We go up and down the medieval time frame. So what drew you to writing about the period around the Battle of Brunanburh?
So I'm going to be really honest. I can't actually remember. So this series has been republished with Boldwood Books, but it's actually based on a trilogy that I started writing back in 2014. So I was a bit like, well, why did I do that? Now, I'm very grateful to them. Somebody liked one of my reviews on Goodreads in this last week, and I looked at it and I went, I think that's the book that I read that inspired me to do this. So it was a book written by a military historian, actually about the Battle of Hastings. And one of the things that he kind of laboured was how very small physical features in the landscape could have such a massive impact on a battle. I'm not one of those people that goes out and walks fields. Well, I didn't used to, I do it now. So I never had really considered it. So I think that was a bit of a spark. And I was like, I could write about a battle. But that wasn't it. That wasn't the only thing. I was also studying for my master's. And I was doing it via distance learning, but I had access to the local university library. And what I did was I basically worked my way along the Saxon shelf. So anything that they had, I picked it up and I read it. And I think at that point, I just read Sarah Foot's monograph on Athelstan. So that inspired me. But also, and I hope I'm remembering this right, it was about the time that we had the last vote for Scottish independence going on. And it made me really consider the fact that actually Great Britain, United Kingdom, it's not been united for as long as people kind of seem to think. We used to have Wales, we used to have England, we used to have Scotland, but obviously there was also the smaller kingdoms before that. And I just think that all of these things sort of combined. And then I was looking for a battle. And I was like, well, I'll write about Brunanburh because it's going to give me this opportunity to tell the story of a monumental battle before the United Kingdom was the United Kingdom. So I just want to say this, when I started working on this, it was a very, very long time before we knew that Bernard Cornwall was going to take treads to Brunanburh. So I like to get that in because I'm a bit worried people think, she's just doing it because Bernard Cornwall's done it. That's not true. That's not true. It was started a long time before that. And eventually I can remember the book when I was reading the Bernard Cornwall one and I went, he's going to take him to Brunanburh. And I was a bit like, I don't know how I feel about that. So I've never read the last book yet. I'm saving it until I finish re-editing this series because I don't want anything that happens there to sort of impact what I'm writing. So so that's a very long and complicated story, but I think that's what drew me to the period around Brunanburh, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously it's very interesting because, as you say, of that whole idea of the different kings from various places coming together in one place and having a great fight. If only we knew where it was, but we'll come to that later. One of the things that struck me immediately, and I'm sure it strikes anybody reading those books, is the writing style, which is first person from the point of view of most of the leading protagonists. Now, that is an unusual way, I think we can agree, to write it. So why did you do it that way? Why did you tell the story that way?
I think this wasn't the first book that I wrote. When I first started writing, I was writing fantasy. And actually, when I look back, my fantasy series is multiple point of views. It's not necessarily first person, but I obviously have always liked that style of writing. Again, I can remember I'd written a few books and then I picked up George R.R. Martin's series. I've forgotten the name. What's the name?
Game of Thrones?
How can I forget that? I picked up Games of Thrones and I got them secondhand and there were 4 books, so it's great. I like a fantasy series that's finished. I'll just read them. What a fool. But as I started reading it, he was also doing chapters by characters and I went, oh, okay, this is a good idea. He's doing it, I can carry on doing it. It's not that weird. So that sort of stuck with me. The first person element, I think, was slightly different because I'd started off doing third person. And I think it's just the immediacy of it. If we don't get inside the heads of the characters, then we can't necessarily work out their motivations and why they're doing it. So I adopted that approach for this book. A lot of the reason, I think, when I look back on it, was because originally I wrote it to put on Wattpad. I don't know if people remember Wattpad. I'm sure it's still going. I think it is still going. It's very, very popular. And the idea was that you shared a chapter a week. So there were short, sharp chapters that I wrote specifically to put on there. It's had so many edits since then, but that was where the process started. But also, I wanted to tell the story from the point of view of every character. Now, a lot of authors adopt this third person narrative and it's often not a historical character and they take them to the battle and they let them see things that are playing out. But obviously, I couldn't really do that with Brunanburh because how was this character to know what's going on in the Scots camp, and how's this character to know what's going on with Olaf Gothrason and things like that. So I wanted to tell the story from the main point of views. I wanted to give them a voice because people don't know who a lot of these people are. And whilst my expertise lies in England, I wanted to make sure that the Welsh and the Scottish and the Irish and the Norse, they all had their little bit as well. So there's quite a lot of complicated reasons into it. I probably just picked up a pen and started doing it. But with the benefit of hindsight, I can say probably what my motivations were for it. I think it would probably have been easier to offer it in a different way, but I liked giving my characters voices, and I've been looking back at some of the favorite quotes as well for the characters, and I really like them. I like the things that they say to explain their actions and things like that. So yes, not a normal way of doing it, but I don't know how else you would have done it.
Not to get everybody's view in it.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
I think it works because it does give you that insight, for example, into characters like Athelstan's stepmother.
Yes.
Which you wouldn't, it's a dimension you wouldn't get probably at all, or very little of.
Yes.
So things like that I think are really, really good.
She ended up being in it because when I went back to edit it, I realised that I made Edmund too old. So I had written this beautiful scene with Edmund, and he's there and he's witnessing the Treaty of Earmont being signed between Constantine of the Scots and Owen of Strathclyde and Athelstan and Howell of the Welsh. And then I went, yeah, but he would have been about 2.
Yeah.
He couldn't be there. So that scene, unfortunately, got taken out. But there were other scenes as well. And I thought I need a different voice. And I'd written about Eadgifu in the intervening period. She's a fascinating character. So I thought, I'm going to put her in there. And also it balanced it out a bit because there's a lot of men in it. There's very few women. So I popped her in to give us a little bit of the feminine side to the story of war, essentially, and motherhood and things like that. So
yeah, I think it does help round the whole story having her in it.
It does. There's quite a funny review that somebody wrote where they put I started reading this and after about 4 chapters I was really confused, so I went back and I realized, oh, I need to read the chapter headings, and then they said, and then it made a lot more sense. But I've done that before. You pick up a book, you just start reading, and then you go, wait a minute.
Yeah, I was a little worried at first when I saw that it was a different person for each chapter because I thought, how am I going to remember who's talking at any particular time? But actually, it took me about 2 chapters and it was like, oh, this is so easy to follow. I don't know how you actually managed to do it, but you always knew who was talking, which character was narrating that chapter. You just knew.
Yes.
You've managed to make everybody so distinct that you don't have to go back and look at the beginning of the chapter if you've left it, if you've had to stop mid-chapter. You don't have to go back to the beginning and have a look at who's talking. You just know. And it is so well done. It's one of the things I was worried about when I started reading it, but I got into it so quickly.
I had the same concerns. Because it's quite difficult because they're all ambitious men.
Yeah.
So how do you make them sound differently? I think it helped that some of the character ages are all quite different. So we've got Constantine, who's kind of he's described in the Brunanburh poem as old and hoary or old hoary man or something like that. So you're a bit like, okay, so he's an older character. Athelstan's kind of the young upstart, but he's also not, because he's older than you think he is. And then we've got Howell of the Welsh as well. He's an older character. So I quite enjoyed it. And there's Owen of Strathclyde. Now, actually, we don't know if it was Owen of Strathclyde that put his name to the treaty at Eamon, or if it was an Owen from one of the Welsh kingdoms who's not recorded elsewhere. So I had to make a judgment call with that. Should I choose this one or should I choose that one? And I chose to make him from Strathclyde, and I chose to make him quite under Constantine's thumb. And that gave me quite a lot of interesting perspectives to do with him. And, he's a bit kowtowed and he's told what to do, essentially. So I was looking back.
Resentful.
He's quite resentful. I was looking back the other day and there's a great line where it says, a month ago I would have thought I had no master, and now I find I have two. And this is after he's signed the treaty. So Constantine's basically said, sign the treaty. And Athelstan said, you need to sign the treaty. So he's like, well, I'll sign the treaty, but I don't want to.
Yeah, I felt sorry for Owen of Strathclyde, actually, all the way through. I felt sorry for him. He was one of the more sympathetic characters, I think. I don't think I felt sorry for Constantine at any stage, because I just kept thinking, well, you brought it on yourself.
Yes, yeah, he does sort of present like that, doesn't he? Yeah, he's quite scheming. I like all of them. I was trying to think who's my favourite character in the series, and actually, I don't think I have one. I've had a few people who say they feel a lot of sympathy for Olaf Gothrason as well. So he's the Norse leader, but I had quite a lot of fun with him as well.
So there are 3 books. The first, King of Kings, follows Athelstan as he establishes his rule in England and supremacy of the British Isles. I'd never seen that before, actually. I'd never thought about how much he actually stamped his presence, not just on England, but on the whole British Isles. So what did Athelstan have to do to achieve this?
This is a really interesting question. When you read the non-fiction books, it's kind of presented as fact. This is what happened.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who don't take the time to sort of explain why it happened. So essentially what we get is Athelstan is proclaimed, according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, King of Mercia when his father dies. His half-brother is supposed to become King of Wessex, but he then dies 16 days later. So the story then goes that Athelstan is eventually allowed to become King of Wessex and King of Mercia. And then when he undergoes his coronation, which is about a year later in 925, he becomes King of the English. And there's a big thing. This is the first time we've actually got the English. Before that, we've had the smaller kingdoms of Mercia and Wessex and the East Angles and Northumbria. So he does something nobody else has done, but equally at the same time, in the kingdom of the Scots, Constantine is consolidating. He's becoming a king of the whole country as we would know it today. And also in Wales, we've got similar things going on. So we've got quite a few little kingdoms, but we've got Idwal of Gwynedd to the north, who's quite powerful. And then we've got his cousin, Howell, who's called Howell of the West Welsh. And they also want to consolidate. So they're trying to do it. Constantine's trying to do it. But Athelstan's successful at it. And not only is he successful at it, but he becomes very renowned. He's incredibly influential. He's got people coming to his court. Apparently it was very metropolitan. His half-sisters marry into East and West Francia, and also into a couple of noble families over there. So there's something about England at this time that makes it better, as it were, than everywhere else. And I think it is the cohesive force. Whatever he has got, whatever he's done, he's brought together these people. Now, a lot of people would say he was the King of Wessex and he's a Wessex. He's from the House of Wessex. But there is this belief that he was raised in Mercia and he was raised there and by his aunt, Lady Athelstan, although David Dunville, very eminent historian, says we've only got William of Malmesbury that tells us this, so it could all be utter rubbish and it might not have happened. But if that is what happened, if Athelstan was beloved in Mercia and then he went to Wessex, he's kind of uniting those two kingdoms. So he brings something different to his father and his grandfather, and in that he almost brings Wessex to Mercia, not Mercia to Wessex. And I think that's quite powerful because Mercia has been fighting the Viking raiders for almost longer than Wessex has. So I just think he's got this big cohesive force, he's got this big reach, and it was accepted. And I think it was that he brought to power. He was kind of the big power at that time. Some people have said he was like at that point England was the successor state to Charlemagne's great empire, because he was that powerful, that cohesive. Everybody else is fighting the raiders, they're all fighting amongst themselves, and he isn't. So I think that's maybe what it is. But like I said, it was a really interesting question and I really had to think about a suitable answer for it. All the historians will just tell you he just did. So we need to sort of work out why he did. And I think that's probably why.
He certainly seems to have had a power base in Mercia, and it's difficult to explain how that would have come about if he didn't have a very close connection to it, seems to me.
I know. And I agree with that. I think there's definitely something a little bit different about him. So I think in my mind, I kind of imagine him taking part in the battles with the Viking raiders, and he's fighting for Mercia, not necessarily Wessex. And he's bringing together, and he's winning renown, and people are flocking to him. And you know, he's almost designated his aunt, the Lady of Athelflaed's successor. So I think that I do. I mean, I'm a Mercian. I'm going to be honest. I'm a Mercian. I want Mercia to be the best at everything. But I think that in this, there is possibly that potential for that was what the reason was. And this year actually sees the anniversary of Athelstan becoming King of the English. It's the, let me get this right, 1100th anniversary of his coronation. So I think that people are looking at him. And I know that Michael Wood is going to be doing a talk about Athelstan. And he's going to be talking about whether it was him as King of Mercia that was the sort of defining moment for him.
Yeah. Okay, so the second book, Kings of War, demonstrates how far Athelstan's influence spreads. And some of this takes place in Ireland in this book. So how did you research that? Was it harder to research the bit in Ireland, or how did you do that?
It was hard. So I'm not an expert on Ireland, and I'm not an expert on the Welsh kingdoms, and I'm not an expert on what's going on in what would become Scotland. Some people would say I'm not an expert on what's going on in England, but I understand the source material for what was happening in England. I don't understand the source material very well in anywhere else. And if it's complicated in England with the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, then it's much more complicated everywhere else. So yes, it was really, really hard. The other problem that you have when you're using multiple sources, if you look at the English source, you're going to find all these historical people called one name. So you're going to get Olaf. If you go to Ireland, they're going to be called something else. They might be called Amlabe. I'm be saying that all wrong because I don't speak Irish, but they might be called that. If you go somewhere else, they might be called Anlaf. Now, this is all the same character, but if you're looking at sources that are predominantly written by a historian with an interest in the other countries, they're going to use the names that they're known by in those countries. So you've got to work out who everybody is, which is hard. And it's not very helpful either in that you get so many people called Olaf. They're all called Olaf. Every Norseman ever is called Olaf. So one of the ways I got around that was to actually take advantage of the fact that to an English speaker, Olaf and Anlaf look completely different. Olaf, Anlaf, and Amlabe look even more different, but they're all got the same name. So I took advantage of that. The other problem, as I've already said, is that they often don't offer an explanation as to why anything happened. basically because they don't know. There's not enough information. So then when you're writing fiction, you've got to try and thread the needle, as it were, and put all the bits together and see why things were happening. So yes, it was really hard. I don't know why I did it. When I went back, I was amazed by the things that I'd done. And what I've done recently is I've tried to find all my research books for it to see what I was doing, and I just have like lists of things. This equals that equals this equals that, and I think, okay, so that's the way my mind works. It's like a mathematical equation. It was fun. I made a few mistakes. I constantly learned things. So when I was doing the re-edit, I had to go back and do some more research to find explanations, or to at least find an explanation in my mind as to why certain things happened. But yes, it's not an easy task. I will put it like that.
It never is, though, is it? Really? Even, I mean, when I was writing in the 15th century, I mean, I thought it'd be fairly straightforward from the point of view of sources and so on, but actually it's a nightmare. And you've got some events which are told as if they're no relation to the other accounts at all. They just miss everything out. And you think, well, which one's right? So further back in the period you're writing in must be a complete nightmare.
It is, and I think there's a lot of misconceptions, and I admit I had the same misconception, especially about the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. I think most people just assume a monk was sitting there, and every year at the end of the year they would just write down what they thought was important, but that doesn't seem to be what happened. It seems to have been written in chunks.
Yeah.
So then obviously you've already got the benefit of hindsight going into what we're actually being told. So you need to know when it was written down, but it's almost impossible to know when things were written down.
And then they throw a spanner in the works because one of them says it was too tedious to tell.
Yeah.
And there's that thing, isn't there, where they always assume that you know.
Yeah.
And you're a bit like, I don't know. One of the things that gives me a lot of bother is when you read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, everything's related to a religious festivity or festival, and
then you get you wonder why the English are obsessed with the weather, and then you read the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and they're obsessed with the weather.
They're always obsessed with the weather. There's a lot of weather phenomenon, but then you look at it and you go, okay, so what do I remember? I mean, up in Northumberland, we had that huge storm that took down loads of trees. When was it now? 2021 storm and wind. So, that storm really means a lot to me, but down south or somewhere else, perhaps it doesn't have the same impact. But to me, it means something because it knocked down all the trees at Cragside, and I love visiting Cragside, so it was a bit upsetting. So yes, you go, well, nobody else knows about that.
Well, the weather's a marker, isn't it? As you say, for various people.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the time when it was really, really cold and there was ice, the river froze, whatever. And in those days, rivers froze more than they do today because of the circumstances of the time, like the Thames, for example, which didn't have the big embankments and so on. And then you've got things like strong winds, which did a lot more damage then than they do now. And it's just the nature of the time that people were more vulnerable to the weather. Drought, crops failed. It's all about that, isn't it? That's the seed of life. It's all about the basics of life.
Yeah, it was much more significant in their life, the weather.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember in the 70s when we couldn't have roast potatoes at a certain time of the year. It had to be boiled potatoes because these kind of potatoes didn't roast well. You had cauliflower in winter because you didn't get it in summer, and you only had lettuce at certain times of the year. We have everything all year round now. There's no restrictions on what vegetables you eat.
This is live oral history, folks. You heard it from Sharon Bennett Connolly.
Only 40 years ago, you had seasonal vegetables. They didn't have freezers, they just dug a hole in the ground if they wanted to keep things cold. So they were living hand to mouth.
They didn't have potatoes at all.
No
roast potatoes, no chips. It must have been a nightmare.
I know. How did they cope with it? And in fact, I mean, especially at the moment with everything that's going on with the weather, you could look at it and say we've almost lost sight of the impact that the weather has. We've sort of think that we should be able to defeat it, and sometimes I think that that's kind of wrong. We need to accept the impact that the weather has on things,
Yeah.
be more accepting of it than we perhaps are. I've been thinking that quite recently.
Well, I've had to
Yes.
accept it because I can't get into Gainsborough at the minute because the road's flooded. So I wonder if my shopping delivery, my supermarket delivery will arrive tomorrow.
21st century problems. The rubber's flooded. Can my delivery come? Write that down in a chronicle.
Anyway, back to the podcast.
Olaf Scabbyhead. I could not read his name without laughing, bless him. Poor Olaf Scabbyhead. I've got this horrible image of poor Olaf Scabbyhead.
Olaf Scabbyhead. And
Yeah.
I know what question you're going to ask me, and I don't know why. I don't know why. But going back to my earlier thing, I wonder if it's because they were all called Olaf. Is it the only way that they could differentiate them? Olaf Scabbyhead, Olaf not Scabbyhead, son of Olaf Scabbyhead. I found his name in Claire Downham's book on the Norse at the time, and when I came across it, I went, "Oh, that's such a good name." So she'd given the Irish of it, which is I can't say it. Starts with a C, which I could have used, but I went, nah. I'm going to use Scabbyhead. I'm going to go with what the translation would be, because it does frame such an amazing picture of what he might have been like. I think now that you've said that, I should have spent more time maybe having him like pick it or something, but I didn't. Now I'm a bit gutted that I've only just thought about that.
Might be a bit off-putting.
Vikings had such graphic names. Ivor the Boneless is the one that springs to mind. Because it's like, why? Boneless how?
Yes, and it gives the fiction writer such a heartache, because you've got to think of why. So I've written about Svein Forkbeard. Why was it called that? Was it just beautifully done? So that's what it looked like. They didn't have forks, did they? So then you're left scrabbling around, going, well, there must be a reason why he's got this name. So I'll have to come up with a reason for it.
I don't know, love Scabbyhead. He'll go in. I'm 6'2" tall, and it's my head you're naming me after just because I've got one scab.
Very devastated that I didn't have him picking his scabs all the time, but it is a fabulous name.
Yeah. Anyway, moving away from characters that are scabby, throughout the series, you've referred to, or you've included Elfwyn, the daughter of Athelflaed, Lady of the Mercians, and this is someone that, as far as I'm aware, in historical terms, we're not entirely certain of her fate. So, why did you include her in the story, and how did you present her?
Okay, so Elfwyn, the daughter of Athelflaed, is one of another characters that I've written about. So I was quite intrigued by her because the historical record will tell you that she succeeded her mother as the Lady of the Mercians, and then a year later, or 6 months later, there's a bit of a problem with the dating, her uncle Edward the Elder, who's Athelstan's father, marches into Mercia and takes her away, essentially, and that's kind of the last that we hear of her, which is a bit of a shame because it's quite a monumental thing for a woman to be succeeded by another woman. However, there has been some research done, and it's really, really tentative. There's a possibility that she didn't become a nun, which is what is quite often accepted, or she wasn't murdered, which is less accepted, but is a possibility. And that is that she actually married a very powerful ealdorman. And this ealdorman, who is known as Athelstan the Half King, which is great because he's called Athelstan. So we've got Athelstan and Athelstan. I purposely mentioned it, and when it came back to me, my editor, because I've put a line that said it's very confusing for everybody but us, and my editor put a little note in that said this sounds like the author's voice, and it is the author's voice, but I think it's me accepting to my audience that it is confusing. It's a bit of an apology.
I noticed that you do mention that. I think, is it Constantine who says too many another Athelstan?
Yes, another Athelstan, and there's another Athelstan as well.
Yeah.
When I'm editing book 4, I've just come across another Athelstan, and I thought, oh no, there's more Athelstans than I can do anything with. So there's this possibility that she married this very, very powerful ealdorman, and this is what I've explored through telling her story, which I did after I wrote the initial trilogy for Brunanburh. So then when I was re-editing it and adding a lot more content, I thought, I'm going to include her in this because her husband, if he was a husband, is a very important character in the rest of the books. And it also
Yeah.
plays into this Mercian idea because Athelstan may have been raised with her. So I wanted to explore it and to see how it played out over time. Sometimes I can't do that in my head, but if I write out the characters and let that happen, it gives me quite an interesting perspective on what's happening. So I think that's the freedom of fiction. When you're writing non-fiction, you can't really do that.
Yeah.
But if you're playing around with fiction, you can have a look. Is this what might have happened? So if that is what happened, and that is what she became, the wife, she was the wife of the ealdorman of the East Angles. So she wasn't related to Mercia in this case, but her husband's family had been associated with Mercia. So, they might have grown up together as well. There's that possibility. But if that is what happened, then she married this man. They had 4 sons. They were very, very powerful. The husband earns the name Athelstan, half king. Now, it's always been said it's because he was so powerful. He was so powerful, he was half a king. What if that's not what it was? What if it's because he was married into the royal family? He was married to the king's cousin. It's that Athelstan.
Yeah.
It could be that he was just very short, sort of hobbit sized.
Yes, yeah.
I didn't realise it was that Athelstan. Oh wow!
So yeah, so
I just had a full circle moment because I mentioned Athelstan half king before, and so
Oh, okay. So we've got a scabby head and a half king. So I've explored this idea. So what I've done in the stories about Elfwin is I've retold the story of what might have happened in Mercia after the death of her mother, and then I do have her. There's no spoilers here. I do have her shipped off by her uncle, and she goes into captivity. And hopefully no spoilers again. At the end of the book, Athelstan comes and rescues her and takes her away, and they become friends, and she helps him become king. So this is in the other books, not the Brunanburh series. So I wanted to maintain that consistency because I've written quite a lot of books that are all set in the same time period now.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 things. I have to try and get historical fact correct, but I'll argue about any facts at this period because I don't think there really are any. But I also have to get my sort of creation of what's going on correct. So I bring her in. She's not a massive character in this series, but she's there. So she's sort of bolstering the royal family and Athelstan in particular.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had quite a lot of fun with her.
Especially in that first book, he does mention her a couple of times, and that he's got her support. And it does make sense that she'd be married into East Anglia rather than Mercia, because if she was in Mercia, unscrupulous ealdormen could have used her against Athelstan.
They could have done, yes. And there's also a sort of another to explore as well. So Athelstan marries some of his half sisters into different monarchies. So his natural sister, there's a possibility they were twins, marries the King of York, Sitrick, and obviously his half sisters marry into East and West Francia and into some noble families. So what about if he did marry his cousin into the kingdom of the East Angles? That would have also brought the kingdom of the East Angles into the sphere of England and made that connection. So I think there's a lot of possibilities to explore there. There's absolutely no proof, unfortunately.
No, but it does make sense. It does
make sense. And in a fictional environment, I think it makes quite a lot of sense to explore that. So the only other possibility is that she did become a nun, and there is a charter from the reign of Edmund, who's Athelstan's successor, but also Elfwin's cousin, where there is a charter given to an Elfwin. It could be her, it might not be her, we don't know. So there's a lot going on, but I like this idea of giving Elfwin her own story when she's been forgotten about. Her mother gets everything. Everybody writes about Athelflaed. She was great, she was this, she was whatever. And I'm not saying she wasn't, but it was a good way to return her to the narrative and maybe have her do something else other than either disappear or become a nun.
I must say, I did like that. I liked that Elfwin was in it and that she had a life. I thought, good.
Exactly. Sometimes we can give people things that they might not have had. We can redress the balance. We can make it right. When we're writing fiction, we can do that.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, Elfwin was a woman, and they rarely wrote about women anyway.
Exactly. And she's really rare anyway, because she does get mentioned in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. So her name is in there. There's loads of other women as I've discovered, of the era who are not mentioned in it. at all. So you
Yeah.
go, Alfred's wife is named, Athelflaed's named, her daughter's named, and then two of Athelstan's half sisters, one of Athelstan's half sisters and his actual sister are mentioned but not named. So the marriages are discussed, but their name is not given. So there you go. That's it.
Yeah.
There's no one else.
Yeah.
That's actually not true. There are a couple of abbesses who are named later on in the period, but that's it.
So the Battle of Brunanburh, that was a big undertaking to write. Why did you decide on the Wirral as the location? I hope that's not too big a spoiler.
I don't think that's too big a spoiler. So yes, the Battle of Brunanburh, as I think we've already said, there's actually been more discussion about where it took place than the significance of what Athelstan achieved at Brunanburh. The problem is we don't know where Brunanburh was. There's nowhere called Brunanburh anymore. There has been a move to place it at the Wirral. If you look on an old map, the Robert Morden map, which I think is the 17th century, it's very confidently labelled as Brunanburh, not very far from Bamburgh in Northumberland. It's very confident. It's just there with like your little mark. Oh, okay, that's fine. And then other places have also been mentioned. Now, I chose the Wirral because with my fiction head, I couldn't get over the fact that they're anticipating all these Norse under Olaf Gothrason alongside Olaf Scabbyhead getting to the eastern side of northern England. How would they get there? What did they do? Did they take their ships all around the top of Scotland and risk going through all the outer isles, which, you know, it's quite rough up there? Did they come down the bottom of England? Did they travel overland from where they came ashore, which would have been close to the Wirral, because that was how they would have made their way to York? So to me, it didn't make sense for them to be anywhere else. I thought it would perhaps take place at the closest location in the UK that they could get to from Dublin, essentially. So that was why I chose that. I know historians have got lots of other reasons why they chose it, all to do with naming conventions and other things, but to me it was what made sense in my mind when I was trying to place them. Now, how I kept all the characters in the right place, I don't know. As I said, this is an old book that I edited and massively rewrote. But as I was reading it, it was like it'd been written by a different person. I've written so many books, I couldn't remember all the details. There are two scenes when I was editing that completely threw me. I had forgotten that was how I had written the battle. Slightly spoilery. There's one of them where you're a bit concerned about who's just been killed. You're a bit like, wait a minute, that's not what happened. And then there was another bit where I got to it and I went, Athelstan's not there. He's not in the thrust of the battle line. He's not fighting everybody. And I thought, I'm going to have to massively rewrite this, but it all makes sense as you go through.
It did.
So that worked. But how I kept them separate, I think I think it was their characters. I think that was what spoke to me. So Constantine's probably too old to be fighting. He could potentially have been into his 60s. I can't imagine him fighting. He could have been. And then the accord that he reaches with Olaf Gothrason, they're really uneasy with one another. Like they're allies, but they don't really want to be allies, but they've got a purpose, which is to defeat Athelstan of the English. And I think it was what their ideas were and what they wanted to achieve that kept them separate. And then obviously we've got poor old Owen of Strathclyde, who is somehow in the thick of it all and probably doesn't want to be there. Let's be honest, I don't think he wants to be there. So
no,
I wish I could remember the process that I went through. It probably involved lots of maps and drawing things and putting them in different places. When I went back and I did this massive edit on it, I put in a lot more geographical details to do with, I'm always rubbish at rivers and seas. I never know which way around they are. You can spend a lot of time saying, yeah, the sun rises in the
seas are the big bits, and the
the
rivers are the narrow
the
bits.
sun rises in the west. You're like, no, that's not what happens. That isn't what happens. And I think one of the overriding things was it is written that the battle took all day. It was a long battle. It wasn't, over in 5 minutes. So you've got to bring in that it wasn't just the English were definitely going to win. We didn't know that. So you've got to put in the shove and the the fighting, and maybe they're going to win, or maybe they're going to win. And I think that's probably what also kept the characters in the right place. Hopefully.
It worked. Whatever you did, it worked. It was really well done, and it was very absorbing, because also you just got into what one character's doing, and then you change the chapter and you're reading another character.
Exactly. I know, and you want to know what's happening there, and then you're taken out of that and you go somewhere else. So yeah, it was really interesting for me to go back and edit it and see what I'd done before and add in all these extra details that really filled it out and made it much better. I'm really pleased with the finished product. I was a bit daunted to start with, and then I went, actually, I'm going to have some fun with this. So I did.
One of my thoughts at the time was, if one of these characters that she's actually speaking through gets killed, how do you do that? Because this character's saying what's happening, and he's just about to, it was illuminating, because it was like, that's always been my thing with first person, is that you can't really describe their death because they're dying, so they haven't got time to do it, sort of thing. But it really worked.
Thank you. I'm glad it worked.
Shakespeare managed it, though. Just the character just says, "I am slain."
There is that thing. How do you do it? What do you do? Do you labour the point? There's a big thing, isn't there, about back in, I think it was back in the 80s, big death scenes. Everybody wanted a big death scenes, all the actors and actresses. You're a bit like, well, how do you do it? You can't keep going, oh, woe is me. There's a great big fight taking place all around them.
Yeah, just get off stage.
Yes.
I think the battle's more difficult in a way because we don't know exactly where it is, because for most battles, some incorrectly, but for most battles, you've got maps and plans of the actual battle, where everybody was and so on. But there's not that much for this battle, simply because it's still being sort of vociferously argued over. So, yeah, it makes it more difficult. I know when I wrote battles, if I had so much information about who was where and so on, not always, but mostly, that it was much easier to visualize than a sort of blank space, really.
Oh, you see, I just think that's just an excuse to make it up.
Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah.
And of course, the phrase "never greater slaughter" means death everywhere. Great, yes. I can kill everybody.
when I was working on the edit, at one point I put the force was so big, there were so many thousands, and then I'm rubbish at keeping track of certain things. When I write, I get a bit carried away, and then I go, I don't know how many people I said were here. So then I put in a different figure, and then another figure. I can remember sending it back to my editor and going, how big should it be? I don't know if I got a response. I think I had to make the decision myself.
Well, the other thing about that period, or in fact anywhere in the past, more or less, short of modern times, is that numbers were vastly overestimated most of the time. So it's very difficult to know how many were actually involved in these battles.
Yes, there's a later source, Simeon of Durham, if that's how you say his name. Just he says something like there were 650 Norse ships. So if there were 650 Norse ships, how many people? If you work roughly, there's 50 people to a ship. Sometimes there's more. That's a massive force. But what you notice, especially with I think battles in the past, is the greater the distance in time to when it actually took place, the bigger the numbers become.
Yeah, but also most of the people describing the battle haven't got the foggiest idea about a battle anyway. They don't know how many. They probably don't even know, how many a ship could hold. So they just pluck a number most of the time out of 650 in that time period means there were a lot of ships. And that's all it means, really.
The other thing is, Simeon of Durham was writing from Durham, so he probably wasn't there at the time. So he heard this from somebody else. Now, what if that person wasn't a monk and hadn't been taught to count beyond the number 10?
Yeah. Well, Simeon of Durham also thinks it took place on the northeast. So, he thinks, I think he said there were that many ships and they came up the Tyne or something. I don't know. So yes, there's a lot going on. So perhaps don't trust Simeon of Durham. I'm very wary of any, because we can't really call them a historian, pseudo historians that says I was told this or I read this, or you're a bit like, why don't you just be honest? I'm making this up.
Yeah, and you also have to be careful of the primary sources. They're called primary sources, but like William of Malmesbury was writing in the 12th century. So how's he a primary source for the 9th and 10th centuries?
Yes.
He also made stuff up, basically.
He did make stuff up, and that's something that really, really frustrates me, because if you haven't studied the period and you don't know, if you read somebody's account of it and they say William of Malmesbury tells us this and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells us that, then you've muddled those two sources, neither of which are probably contemporary, but you're almost presenting them as that's fact. You can't really do that. You've got to question why he was writing. You've got to question why they were writing. You've got to question why this information has even survived. So yes, this is what I mean. I will argue about any facts, any fact from the period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you've got to question. The trouble is, you get to the point, I found this when looking at the 5th century, is that you get to the point where you don't actually believe any of the sources at all. But then if you say, well, I'm just to ignore them all, you've got nothing at all.
I know.
So, you know, it's you have to make a judgment, don't you?
You do.
And then you have to throw in the bias as well and say, why did they say there were 650 ships?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Why are they telling us this? What purpose is it? Are they just basically a fiction writer and they're just having a bit of fun and they want to make sure that people read about this, or are they sort of trying to prove a point somewhere down the line?
Trying to make it look like a greater victory than it was, when in the end it was actually just two blokes having a fisticuffs fight.
Yeah.
So that's the Battle of Brunanburh, actually. It's two blokes going, it's your fault. No, it isn't. It's your fault.
I think there were at least 5 blokes.
There were quite a few there.
And the woman at the side going, it started it.
Exactly, yeah. Handbags at dawn and all that. But yes, I don't know. Yes, you do end up not trusting anything. So the advantage of being a fiction writer is you can pick and choose what you decide to use as you're not trusting it, but you know what you weave your narrative around.
Yeah. Okay, so after Brunanburh, Athelstan is kind of supreme, but it's still a bit fragile, isn't it? And 2 years later or so, somewhere like that, he dies. So his successor, his half brother Edmund, in Clash of Kings, I think you focused on that period after Brunanburh. So what are the problems that Edmund has to deal with after that huge sort of success at Brunanburh?
I think Edmund had to deal with a number of things. First of all, he had to deal with the fact that he was young. He was only 18, as it said, when he became king. He had to contend with his brother's reputation, which I imagine was massive. And he was left with all the aftermath. You know, Athelstan won at Brunanburh, but, you know, what about the people that lost? They're not going to leave that. They're not going to say that's it. It's not as if history stopped at Brunanburh, and since Brunanburh, Athelstan's king of the English, the Norse are happy in Dublin, Constantine of the Scots is happy in his kingdom. That's not what's going to happen. They're all going to push and shove and test it. So because obviously we don't know all the details, what happens afterwards, it's not really a spoiler, is Edmund faces a massive backlash. So we don't know whether it started whilst Athelstan was still alive, or whether Olaf Gothrason took advantage of Athelstan's death, but he very quickly decides he's going to counter the gains made at Brunanburh. He wants York back because Athelstan took York in 927 and he's held it ever since, but Olaf thinks it's his birthright. He wants it. So Edmund has to contend with his brother's death. All these people want him back what Athelstan has taken from them, essentially, and he's got to do it at a time, well, in the book I make it very immediate, and it's winter because Athelstan dies in October, so everything sort of seems to tumble not Edmund's way. And I think the best way you can describe it is Athelstan starts reigning in 924 and he dies in 939, so he's got 15 years to accomplish what he accomplished at Brunanburh. Edmund doesn't have that time. He's got to try and hold on to what his brother gained whilst fighting against all these people that want it back as well. So he's young, he's untried. Athelstan has had his hand in so many pies. He's in East Francia, he's in West Francia. There is a belief that his fleet might have been sent to assist his nephew, who was Louis IV of the West Franks. They're having a fight with the East Franks. his half sister's married into West Francia, his other half sister's married into East Francia. There's a big family thing. He's got cousins who are living in Flanders.
Yeah.
It is Flanders, isn't
Yeah, it was Flanders.
Is it Flanders? Yeah, it was Flanders. Thank you. I suddenly went, was it Brittany? No, it wasn't Brittany. It is in Flanders. So there's like the whole family argument going on over there. And yet Edmund is faced with Olaf Gothson. I don't think I'd want to face Olaf Gothfridsson on the path to vengeance. I think that it would be too much. So I sort of look at it as everything that Athelstan's accomplished, Edmund then has to do again. So the problems are monumental. I think the only thing he's got going for him is nobody says, actually, you shouldn't be king. Yeah. There's no disagreement in England as to who the successor is going to be. And that is kind of, you've got to say that that's one of the good things about Athelstan. He may not have expected to die. It may have been unexpected. We don't know why he died, which annoyed me because I then had to come up with a whole scene as to why he died. Was he wounded at Brunanburh? Was there something else? So I had to sort of cobble together what happened as to why he died. But Edmund does become king, and he's got the support of Athelstan the Elderman already, who may or may not have been married to his cousin. You see what I mean? See what I'm doing? But yeah, so Athelstan's a big blaze of glory, and then I feel really sorry for poor Edmund.
It's interesting when you say we don't know why Athelstan died. If you're a historian, you can just say we don't know why he died. But often people say, well, it's all right for fiction writers, they can make stuff up. But the thing is, you have to make something up. You can't just leave it. Oh, I don't know why he died. Never mind, move on. You have to actually explain it in fictional terms, whereas a historian doesn't.
Exactly. And it's quite difficult.
Otherwise, you've got a hole.
Exactly, you've got a hole. So in the original, the way I originally wrote this trilogy was the first book's the Battle of Brunanburh, and then we start book 2 and Edmund's king. So I don't actually explore what happens after Brunanburh, and I don't explore what happens to Athelstan. So this is all something that I had to write in. And in fact, I think Lady Yaghafu is one of the characters that really helped me here. She really pulled it together for me because she's kind of steady. And she's confident. She's been a member of the Wessex royal family for 2 decades at this point. She's probably still a reasonably young woman, because they think she was quite young when she married the king. So she might only have been like just about 40 or just slightly into her 40s. But I kind of took her as the stage. She knows what's going on. She supported Athelstan. She can support her own son, because Athelstan was her stepson, and bring it all together. But yeah, how'd you kill a king when you don't know? So it's also very interesting because in the sources you don't get told why he died. So we know he wasn't probably murdered because we're not told that, and the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle does like to mention when somebody gets murdered,
even if there's just a suggestion of a murder.
Exactly. We know he probably didn't die in battle because we're not told that, and I think that we would have been told it. So it must have been something else. So I had to sort of play around with that. But yeah, fiction, you've got to go, oh well, it can't be that, but it could have been that.
We non-fiction writers have it so easy.
You do.
You don't have to explain anything. I mean, other than the fact you have to understand your source material, and you have to be able to go, it could have been this, it could have been that. Sometimes you don't have to go, and this happened because of that.
We can just put all the different alternatives down and leave it to the reader to decide.
Exactly.
Or just say, I think it was probably this, but who knows?
Yes, I know. So much easier.
And then you remember that we have to do the footnotes as well. Not so much easier.
Oh, footnotes and indexing. Oh, it's a whole new fresh hell I've never
Indexing is before. A nightmare. I hate indexing.
Yeah, Derek, when are you doing a non-fiction
I keep
book?
crying.
Well, at the moment I am actually. I am doing something. Yeah, I'm. What am I doing? I'm writing up my Wars of the Roses podcast into a book.
Oh, fab.
So, as a sort of guide to the Wars of the Roses, Idiot's Guide to the Wars of the Roses.
They've been very popular, those books. That sort of book.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm doing that at the moment. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. But
we're going to make him index it first, and then we'll see what he does.
I mean, the thing is, indexing is so hard, but it's essential. Well, it's just, and especially when it's really hard when you've got, like, when I did Defenders of the Norman Crown, I had different men named William de Warren.
Oh, and then you have to put like a little
Yeah.
explanation as well, and you're a bit like, right, so what should this person be most known for? Because I've got a lot of characters who are called, I've got a lot of Athelflades. That was really a popular name.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to try and make it as clear as possible for your reader as well as for you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've just done Women of the Anarchy, which is out January 15, and there are so many Matildas. I could just have done an index just of Matildas and just left everybody else out. Nobody would have been bothered about anybody else, except maybe Stephen. So, MJ, what's next? Clash of Kings is out now, by the time this broadcast goes out. What's coming next?
Okay. My problem is never finding a next project. So I'm currently editing the final book in the series, which doesn't have a name yet. I've got an idea what I want to call it, but it might get changed. So I'm not going to mention it in the hope that maybe it won't get changed and I can take responsibility for it. I'm also writing another book in the Last King series, which has got so many different names, but I tend to call it the Last King series, but officially it's called the Mercian 9th Century. So they're my sweary fighty books, featuring Coldwulf II, who I've discovered should be called Cholwulf apparently, but that doesn't work for me, so he's Coldwulf. And then my other character, Isel, who some people called Ickle. Some people call him Ickle, but he's a big butch warrior, so I call him Isel. I've just yesterday started work on the next book in that series as well. I might do another non-fiction book. I haven't decided yet. I've got 2 ideas I'd like to look at, and I'm going to see if either of them sticks.
So after Clash of Kings, it's your non-fiction book that comes out next, isn't it?
That's right, yes. Hopefully it'll be out at the end of January. It's been a really interesting process working on a non-fiction book. It's very, very different to writing fiction.
That's about Mercian women, isn't it?
It's about the women of Saxon England in the 10th century. So it's more, to be honest, it's a little bit more Wessex based because it's about the royal family, but there is a chapter called Mercian Wives. So that's when we get all our Mercians. So that's good. We've got Mercian Wives, English Wives, the Continental Connection, and a few other little. There's a lot of religious women as well. So Edward the Elder had at least 3 sons and possibly, let me get this right, 9 daughters. So he had 8 or 9 daughters. So we don't actually know for sure how many he had.
I wonder if he did.
Some of them have got very confusing names, like I've spoken about Lady Yadgafu. Well, one of the daughters is also called Yadgafu. So that's quite difficult. Get your Yadgafus in order. So yes, that's the next one that's coming out. Then I've got a new Coldwulf. Then I've got another Isel. I purposely sat down in December and I went, I want 2024 to be much calmer because 2023 has been manic, absolutely manic. I've been doing things all over the place. And then I sort of had a look and I went, oh, well, I've already got like 4 books slated for release next year. So how's that taking it easier? But I suppose what I'm thinking is for 2025, because that's when many of the books that I'm working on this year will come out. So yes, I'm constantly writing, and I'm still working on my Earls of Mercia series, which is retelling the final 100 years of Saxon England through the eyes of the Earls of Mercia, as opposed through the Godwin family, who everybody knows about. And if I ever pick up a book on the period and they don't mention the Earls of Mercia, I fling it aside in disgust because they've kind of been written out of history, which is a shame.
No, I mentioned them in Silk and the Sword. I'm making sure I did. Yeah. Because I had to mention Godiva, Lady Godiva.
That's good. She's a great character as well. I like her. So yes. So just more writing, hopefully a bit calmer. Lots more fiction. And I've got an idea for a new series as well. So I might work on that.
So you're going to be busy.
Going to be busy. Yes. I like to be busy. I like to be writing. For this year, I've instigated a new writing routine. So one of the things I've always said is the thing I'm good at is I'm good at writing. I can sit down and bash out a lot of words quite quickly. But last year, I found that I had to do it in certain points. I could only really concentrate on one project sort of for 4 months of the year. So, I could write 5,000 words a day for that month. But then something else would come up. So this year, I'm trying to do 2,000 words a day, every day, on something, and then work on all the other projects as well. So I'm doing all right so far. I haven't done today's though. Oh no, I shouldn't have said that. I need to go and do that.
Actually, so have I, because I need to get mine done. So, oh, dear. Well, thank you very much, MJ Porter. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. I've really enjoyed it. I don't think we stopped laughing all the way through. Apologies to anyone who can't hear it because we're laughing.
And not just about scabby heads.
Although mainly about scabby head.
I would just like to say, listeners, that none of us have currently got scabby heads.
But I will have by the end of it because I keep doing
Oh, okay. No, thank you very much. You've made me find out all my notebooks.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
We will let you get back to write your 2,000 words.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Yeah, lovely to talk to you. I will see you at H&S 2024.
Yes, yeah. We're in action there.
We are.
I should be there with some old maps with my dad. So,
Oh, see you then.
right. Thank you. I shall let you get back to your Tuesday. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great to chat.
Yeah.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. I really enjoyed that discussion. So thanks to MJ Porter. Join us next time when we have a returning guest. Angus Donald will be joining us to talk about his new serialized series. He is releasing a couple of chapters at a time of the Broken Kingdom series, which is loosely based on the King Arthur story. So we've been looking for somebody to talk about Brunanburh for a while, and we'd also been looking for somebody to talk about King Arthur for a while. And then Angus Donald says his new series is King Arthur. So looking forward to talking to Angus. So join us next time. I'm Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks, and we'll see you next time.